Hey y'all, who dat, and welcome in. I'm Jeff Nowak, and this is Inside Black and Gold. I'm coming at you solo for this episode. This is part 2 of our Meet the UDFAs series. Is it technically a series if there's only 2 games? Project, whatever you want to call it. We went through all the offensive UDFAs in the earlier episode this week, and this time we're going to go through the 7 defensive UDFAs and also the punter, because that's just how the numbers matched up. I want to apologize in advance for anyone watching this on YouTube, because you have happened upon the one time every 2 to 3 years that I don't have a full beard. I just got bored yesterday and I decided to shave it all off, and now it's like, a rainforest, every now and then it has to burn down so it can grow back, right? It's kind of how I approach it. But either way, same guy, just his look different. This is what my chin looks like, but I digress. We're going to get into a lot of stuff in this episode. First things first, I do want to give a couple of notes. We talked about this in part 1, but Saints rookie minicamp is coming up. It's going to be running May 10th through 12th. So that's a big reason why I want to go through all the UDFAs, because the 16 players who are going to be out there that you would anticipate would continue on to OTAs, would continue on to mandatory minicamp, and then would continue on to the full training camp, which would be out in Irvine. Now, if you combine those with the draft picks, that's 23 rookies who will be out there that we know a little bit about, right? Then there's going to be a whole host of tryout players who are just looking for a shot, looking to show what they can do. And that's going to be something that we can look a little bit more closely in once everything gets here. But I just wanted to give you a better picture of, who's going to be out there, who's going to be wearing these numbers. One bit of news that has come out over the last couple of days, I think I had mentioned earlier in the week that we were looking at potentially an episode late in the week to kind of break down the schedule when it comes out. Well, unlike what everyone basically expected, including teams around the NFL, the 2024 schedule will not be coming out until May 15th. Now, that's a little later than most years. And that seems to be the going trend over the last couple of years, is the schedule comes out later and later and later. And the Saints have a couple interesting matchups that I'm really intrigued to see where they land. Now, if you go back to last year's schedule, the Saints had really one primetime game. And it was week 2 Monday Night Football. And that was because of Bryce Young. It was Bryce Young's home debut for the Panthers. So they could have been playing anybody. It would have been a Monday Night Football game. So that wasn't even really a Saints draw that got them to Monday Night Football. The other 2 quote-unquote primetime games were Thursday Night Football, which I don't really consider, when you talk about primetime, yes, the time slot would be considered prime time, but Thursday Night Football, call it what you want. It is not Sunday night. It is not Monday night. And it certainly isn't the biggest time slot, because that actually belongs to, I want to say, Fox Afternoon. One of those 2 broadcasts is typically the highest rated broadcast of the week. And the Saints got 0 of those games. So I would consider an afternoon game a better placement in terms of people actually want to watch these games than a Thursday night game, which most teams don't want to be on in the first place. I would probably guess that 32 teams would prefer to not have to play a Thursday night at all. So one game that should be interesting to watch, Saints-Cowboys. And it's interesting not only because of the matchup, but because that's a potential Thanksgiving game. And I would not be stunned to see the Saints end up on Thanksgiving again, facing off with the Cowboys. That's one to watch. They also rematch with the Packers again in Lambeau. So that's going to be an intriguing kind of go back there and see if you can change your fate a little bit. But the 2 really exciting matchups, Saints host both of them. And it is Raiders at Saints, because it is Derek Carr's first game against the Raiders since leaving prior to last year. Obviously, there's interest there. Then Broncos at Saints. It'll be Sean Payton's first game against the Saints and first game in the Superdome since he left. And those are the type of games that draw ratings, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if the Saints do end up getting a little bit more love in the national TV audience. But I digress. It's really all I wanted to get into, because we're probably not going to have a full preview of the schedule episode. The first episode next week, I'm going to want to get into the rookie minicamp stuff. And then the next episode is going to be going over the schedule. So I think that's just a good primer for what to expect. And this is going to be our shorter segment in terms of the Meet the UDFAs, because there's only 2. So I figured I could give you a little bit of that. And now we will dive fully into the Meet the UDFAs segment. We're going to start with the smallest guy, but he might have the best shot of anybody to make the roster outright in terms of winning a competition. And that's going to be Vanderbilt's Matt Hayball. And you might not recognize this name. If you're an SEC guy, maybe you will, but it's just another Australian punter in the SEC. The SEC is loaded with them. Basically, I wouldn't be surprised if more than half of college punters right now are former Australian rules football players, and Matt Hayball is one of those guys. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, why would we look to Matt Hayball when you just spent a year watching Lou Hedley? And I would agree with you. I think that his route to the roster is not necessarily clear because Lou Hedley is going to have the inside track for good reason. He played an entire NFL season. I wouldn't say that he was greeted by shock and awe by the people watching him punt, but I do think he was a lot more consistent than he got credit for, and he did the things that Darren Rizzi needed him to do. That said, last year he was competing against Blake Gillikin, who I think when you look at it in hindsight, Darren Rizzi had no interest in Blake Gillikin's style of punting, right? Darren wanted to punt a certain way, and so as long as Lou proved he could do it at a satisfactory level, he won the job, and that's what happened. Now, there are areas where you would like to see Lou get better, particularly in, net yardage, and I think that's what you're going to come into. And now you have two punters who punt the same way, who punt the way Darren Rizzi wants the Saints to punt, and whoever's better, I think you go with. Now, better is relative. I think better equals more consistent. And the most consistent you can be at a certain level is going to win the day. So if Matt shows up and has some really nice kicks, but then has a lot of inconsistency, then I don't think you win that job. But either way, I think he does have a chance. It's a guy who got recruited by Lane Kiffin to Florida Atlantic, obviously transferred to Vanderbilt in his final college season and really saw his numbers climb up. He averaged 47.6 yards per punt last year, 24 kicks inside the 20. Compare that to Lou Hedley, who had 43, to Lou Hedley, who averaged about 43 yards per kick, 31 inside the 20. Now, I do think that the net yardage, while I think being pretty telling, is doesn't have a booming leg, but the Saints did also punt an inordinate amount of times from the 50-yard line or around that area, right? So when you're trying to pin somebody inside the 20 from the 45, for example, and you kick it to the 15, right? That's a 40-yard punt. That's a good punt. That's a good result. It's not going to help your net punting yardage, right? But it is a successful punt. So I do think that the net yardage is a little bit misleading at certain points. And what Lou did better than anybody I've seen doing for the Saints in a while is he eliminated kickoffs. I think he allowed the second fewest kickoff return yards in the NFL last year. It was the primary goal of Darren Rizzi, I believe, going into last season was get rid of returns, eliminate that variable and see what you can do. And I think he did that. So we're going to see. But Matt knows Lou Hedley. They're both Aussie guys. One of the things that Darren Rizzi said to me about Charlie Smith and Lou Hedley prior to the draft is it's funny because you're going to hear these two guys talking to each other. They'll both be speaking English and you'll have no clue what either guy is saying. Going to throw Matt Hayball into that conversation as well. Got a pretty thick Australian accent, and it's just going to be, going back and forth. But again, these know each other. It's going to be a friendly competition. They're going to help each other, and may the best man win. He can kick the spiral punt. He can kick the end over end punt. He's going to look similar to Lou. Like if you're hoping that you're going to watch Matt play and suddenly it's not going to be this rugby style kicking, I'm sorry, I hate to break it to you, but it is going to be that. That's what he is. He struggled a bit in the Shrine Bowl, and I think, you look at, do you draft a punter in the 7th round, right? Do you look at that? I think that hurt his chances. Like a guy like Torrey Taylor obviously came off the board. You do see punters drafted. The Saints in recent years, obviously going back to Thomas Morstead, they drafted a punter, but you don't see this team draft specialists really. You see them target guys, and that's what you got here. So I'm interested to see Matt kick. I think there's a scenario where he plays very well, but he doesn't win the job because you just don't want to sit for another season with a rookie specialist. And that is a significant question, right? If you don't have to sit through a rookie specialist and constantly be concerned, well, what if he hits a rough patch? Well, how consistent can we hope him to be? He's got to learn on the job. He's got to learn how to be a pro, this and that, and this and that, and this and that. You can eliminate those variables by going with the guy you know. And I have a feeling that's going to be what ends up happening. But either way, I think that punting competition is going to be interesting because we'll be able to see them punt the same way. When it was Lou versus Blake, these are two completely different style punters, and you can only really figure it out that way. Now, moving on, one more player in this segment, and I put him here not because he has anything to do with Matt Hayball, but just because he is a tweener, and I'm not sure he fits in a grouping with any of the other 6 guys on this list, and that's Isaiah Stalbird. He's a linebacker out of South Dakota State, but he's 6'1", 215 pounds. He started his career at Nebraska. I think he was a walk-on, and then he ultimately transferred to South Dakota State. He's 6'1", 215 pounds, and that doesn't exactly scream linebacker to you. It screams very undersized linebacker, and that's because he came up as a defensive back. He came up as a safety and was converted to linebacker at South Dakota State. So by every sense of the term, this man is a tweener, but there's a chance that works to his advantage. And I'll just let him explain. Here's Isaiah talking about the transition from defensive back to linebacker and how it went for him.
Do you see yourself at the next level, more at safety or linebacker? I've seen you listed as both.
I feel comfortable being able to play both. I feel like I'm a player that can play both and be utilized in different positions. So, whatever coaching staff asks me, I'm going to do it because, I just want to play ball and just keep showing people that I belong and, a great resource for a team as far as playing multiple positions and on special teams as well. So,
what was that transition like going from safety to linebacker?
Yeah, I definitely say, for me, it was pretty smooth because I was already a physical safety. And so I had no problem being in the box whatsoever, but definitely learning more run fits and, just a scheme of the D-line and, a couple different fits. Other than that, it was pretty natural. I mean, when we played in the national championship in that FCS spring season, that week leading up to it, they told me they're going to use me at Sam. So basically learned all their stuff in a week and rotated at that. And then, after that, got moved to Sam linebacker. And then, I've been used as safety as well in the slot as dime nickel. So, it was a very easy transaction because I also had that knowledge of what the DBs were doing behind me. So, I just, trust that they're doing their job, know where they're supposed to be, just continue to develop myself. So.
All right. So now, you look at that and you say, okay, and it's interesting. You don't see a lot of conversions in that way. You don't see a lot of safeties converting to linebacker. A lot of times you'll see box safeties, right? They'll still be called a safety. Like Isaiah Simmons is a good example. He's an undersized safety, but he was undersized linebacker. And it's tough to find spots for those guys in the NFL. It's in a lot of instances, you're basically just a defensive back who doesn't play defensive back. So are you kind of a slot linebacker? You would be expected to be a little better in coverage, but can you also hold up and run support to the point that we can keep you on the field or the point that we can find a roster spot for you, right? Isaiah Simmons was a top 10 pick, and he couldn't find a spot with the Cardinals. They ended up trading him to the Giants. He did latch on there, but you see the issues for a guy that does not fit in any particular position. That said, he ran 4.43 in the 40, 37.8 vertical leap, 18 reps at 225. He is a very good athlete. If you want to know more about him, he's a really, really interesting story. There's a lot available. He grew up in Minnesota, came up through the foster system, very humble beginnings. He's an easy guy to root for. He battled through a lot. He's got a young son. His name is Kendricks. If you go and you watch the full video from the Saints during his introductory interview, Kendricks makes an appearance. And, you look at him and you say, okay, it's a really high character player. He's got a lot of versatility. And this is going to come into play when we talk about someone later on this list as well. For Isaiah to make an impact on this roster, it's probably going to be because you are devoting a lot more resources to that kind of hybrid safety linebacker position, a guy who can go out and make a tackle in space. And that's in part because the new kickoff rule really, really values those players, guys who can run downfield, get there, be athletic, track a guy down, and make a tackle. That's the difficulty. You don't only just have to get there. You don't only have to just be an athlete and get there. You also have to make that tackle. And that's why, so the guy I look at would be, hey, everyone's saying, hey, Dallin Holker is going to make this team because he's an excellent tight end. And to that, I would say, yes, he is a very good tight end, but he's not going to make the roster on pass catching and blocking ability alone. He's got to also prove that he can get out there in special teams and go make a tackle, right? Because he's not going to be impacting the field as a rookie UDFA as a pass catcher. I mean, sure, maybe there could be instances, but that's typically going to be because some guy got hurt, and you're not planning your initial 53-man roster on, well, if this guy gets hurt, we've got him already. No, you're planning your initial 53-man roster on who can make an impact on the field this year. Okay? So for Isaiah to make this roster, it's going to be because he really stands out in that role. And I think there's going to be a handful of players who maybe we're not expecting to land on the roster right now, who really set themselves apart as elite special teams contributors in an area of the game that we know Darren Rizzi and the Saints are going to highly, highly emphasize this year, because this is Darren Rizzi's baby. He knows how important this is. And there's going to be two elements this year that were not there previously. It's going to be who's got the best returners and who's got the best coverage teams. Because not only does this open up the ability to break big returns and get more opportunities for big returns, it also opens up the ability for the teams that are elite in coverage to go down and make those tackles and really pin teams back on the goal line that you were not able to before. It levels the playing field on both sides of that equation, and it also creates opportunities for guys like Isaiah. So again, I fully encourage you to go familiarize yourself with his story. He's a guy who's played a ton of games, 52 games in college, 238 tackles, 1 interception. He had 80 tackles in his last season at San Diego State Jackrabbits, in case you're wondering. But all right, let's wrap up this segment. Again, we went through Matt Hayball, the punter, and Isaiah Stalbird, who is a linebacker who's more like a safety, a really athletic guy who I think could end up making an impact on special teams. So he'll be a guy to watch. But all right, let's go to the break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about the defensive line. There are 2 defensive ends, 1 defensive tackle, and some really intriguing options for the Saints as they move forward. But again, this is Inside Black and Gold. I am Jeff Nowak. I do not have a beard, but I promise I am the same person. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can follow the show at Saints_pod. Again, we are going through all 16 UDFAs. We've already hit 10 of them. That means there are 6 remaining defensive ends and defensive backs. We're going to do it all. Stick around. And we're back here on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. We are going through all 16 UDFAs. But before we go any further, thanks everyone for watching. As always, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Please leave a rating. Please leave a review. And if you know anyone who is interested in the Saints, who is interested in podcasts, who should be listening to podcasts, recommend us. That's all we ask. And we do appreciate everyone who reaches out, everyone who gives us feedback. It's always helpful. Eventually, we will get Steve Geller back. This has kind of been my baby for this week in going over the UDFA. So I kind of kicked him off. He doesn't mind. He's busy. He's a busy guy. But we will be, back at it in full force, particularly once we get some action to talk about as far as rookie minicamp, OTAs, and so forth. So let's continue on our Meet the UDFAs project. In this segment specifically, we're going to be talking about the defensive line. That's 2 defensive ends, 1 defensive tackle. And the first one we're going to hit on is Nathan Latu. He's a defensive end out of Oklahoma State. He started at JUCO and then obviously transferred to Oklahoma State, and he's been there since 2021. This guy's 6'4", 242 pounds. He's a native of Utah. And if the name seems familiar, it should be. Now, you may know the name Laitu Latu, who was the first defensive player taken in the draft. He's also a defensive end. He went to UCLA. He went number 15, the pick after the Saints in this past draft. They are not related as far as I can tell. But he is related to Cam Latu, who is a tight end for the 49ers. He came out of Alabama and was drafted last season. The pair share an agent. They're very close. Nathan said that Cam was more excited than he was when the decision was made that he would be signing with the Saints. But Nathan's an interesting guy. He's a little smaller. He's a little on the smaller side than you would typically see the Saints go for. And 6'4", 242 pounds, it might not sound small, but it's more of a frame thing. You can usually just look at a guy and be like, okay, this is a Saints defensive end. You look at guys like Peyton Turner, Marcus Davenport, Cam Jordan, Carl Granderson, even Isaiah Foskey. Like, you can see the build and the frame that they're seeking. And while some of those picks haven't worked, then you can argue, hey, maybe you do need to change your prototypes to some extent. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen overnight or this year for that matter. That said, he is an intriguing guy. He's a more athletic defensive end, and he's going to be interesting to watch. Of the three players I'm breaking down, I would guess that he would have the lowest chance of latching on to the practice squad if there's, a premium on roster spots for defensive linemen. Let's put it that way. I'd put him at the bottom of this trio in terms of pecking order of chance to make the roster, but we'll see. He's versatile. He's worked with multiple defensive coordinators, multiple styles. He's comfortable with his hand in the dirt. He's comfortable as a stand-up rusher. A lot of these UDFAs, you'll ask them, what's your strength? And they'll say, high motor. And it's interesting. You can see it on tape. I think he's a raw prospect. He got his most work as a super senior this past year, 31 tackles in 14 games, 3 sacks, and a forced fumble. He says one of his favorite players is Cam Jordan. And, it's tough not to appreciate a lot of these players coming up. They've been watching Cam for a long time, particularly 4-3 defensive ends. And guys who really want to make their mark in that type of system, because you don't see a ton of it anymore. You see a lot of 3-4, you see a lot of hybrid systems, and these big-bodied rushers don't always have the chance in those systems to play outside linebacker, to do whatever. So he'll be an interesting guy to watch. Now, another player at defensive end, and that is one of the guys I'm more intrigued by. No offense to Nathan, but it is Trajan Jeffcoat. He was actually the last UDFA the Saints announced. He was not on their initial list. They came to terms with him later. He's a defensive end out of Arkansas, but you may have seen him if you're a fan of SEC football at Missouri. That's where he played his first 3 seasons. 6'4", 266. And again, you're looking at a guy who just has the frame that I think the Saints look for, the build that I think the Saints look for. He's from South Carolina. He actually went to Irmo High School, which is the same high school that my wife went to. She is also from Columbia. So, when they signed him, I had to text him like, do you know this guy? And of course she doesn't. I mean, she hasn't lived there since, 2010. So it's not exactly keeping up with the high school football scene out in Columbia, South Carolina. But it is interesting, right? He and Spencer Rattler will have something to talk about, because Spencer Rattler obviously came out of South Carolina. But, Trajan's a kind of a self-made player. He came out of high school as a 2-star prospect in some rankings, a 3-star prospect in others, but definitely not a guy who you'd say, oh, he's going to go to the SEC and make a massive impact. He was a team captain at Arkansas. He started at Missouri before transferring for his final year. He said that he wanted to stay in the SEC. Started all 12 games, 16 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. The 29 QB pressures he generated was the most on his team. He's just another guy with a ton of experience. That's a trend that you're seeing with these UDFAs, and it makes sense. These are the guys who have put in a lot of work, but didn't get drafted for one reason or another. 60 games, 42 starts in his career, 15.5 sacks, 98 tackles. One of the guys he says he spent a ton of time watching is Cam Jordan. So let's hear that bite from Trajan right now.
Oh, definitely learning from him will be a tremendous opportunity for me. I'm a great listener. I pay attention to everything. And just learning from him, a very skilled, versatile player in the NFL that's very elite. Definitely learning from him will be great. Will be great for me. So I'm truly blessed with the opportunity that God gave me.
Is there anything that you already see in his game that, you feel like could translate well to yours, or maybe that pinpoints a place where you're looking to, take the next step?
Oh, definitely. I've watched Cam Jordan. He's very strong at the point of attack. Looks very loose. Knows how to pass rush. Carry his weight well as well. Definitely just learning from him. Because going to the NFL from college, still got a lot to learn, a lot to process. and definitely learning from him will help my game tremendously. So I'm just humble for the experience.
Again, if these players are coming in saying, I want to kind of emulate Cam Jordan and learn how to play like Cam Jordan, learn how to be a pro like Cam Jordan, more power to you. That is the approach you would want. Now, how true is that? How much of that is you just saying stuff because you want to make a good impression? Sure. But I think that for Trajan to make an impact at the NFL level, and I think he's going to have to do that off the practice squad, that's the guy I would emulate. And I think they do have a little bit in common. He's a good athlete, 4.6'6" in the 40. He's got a 31.5-inch vertical leap, 21 reps at 225. I wouldn't say he's a particularly polished pass rusher. I don't know if I see a counter move in there. He kind of goes to bull rush, goes to overpower people. And then if that doesn't work, you don't see a lot more in his bag right now. That's something that you can learn, but it's something that he'll have to learn, in my opinion. He's not a big talker. He's a lead by example guy. He's another guy that says, hey, I have a high motor. That's something you'll hear from all these UDFAs. Some of it, you can see it on tape. Some of these guys, you don't necessarily see it on tape quite as much. He looks to be quick off the line. He can get upfield. When he give him a straight line of the quarterback to a running back, he's going to go get there. If you want to fall in love with him as a player, if you want to understand, like, well, okay, what is the vision here? Go watch Arkansas, Kentucky. And he was just constantly in the backfield, constantly making plays. You will see him make effort plays and chase a guy down. But other times you'll see him get a little hung up on blocks. And, I think that's where, okay, why wasn't he drafted? I think that's probably the tape you're looking at. But he played right end. He played left end. I think that, for a guy who you're getting as a UDFA, who's the 16th UDFA you signed, there's a lot of good tape to watch. There's a lot of skills there. And the Saints have no qualms about bringing in a UDFA and developing him at the defensive end position. Carl Granderson is a great example of that now. He's the ultimate success story. A UDFA out of Wyoming. Obviously, he dealt with, legal issues in college. And that's part of the reason he kind of had no draft stock whatsoever. But they were able to develop him. And he's a critical part of the Saints defense right now. So we'll see. Maybe Trajan is the next UDFA find for the Saints. Maybe he's not, but either way, it's going to be an intriguing guy to watch. One more player on the defensive line, and that is Kyler Ball, defensive tackle out of Minnesota. You're 6'2", 305 pounds, good athlete, and this is funny because all three of these guys, when they were asked what their best skills were, they talked about their motor. They talked about, how they're relentless, how they do whatever. But Kyler, I think that's definitely true. And I want to listen to what he said about his motor because I thought he expressed it pretty well. So here you go.
I feel like my best attribute as a D lineman would probably have to be the motor I play with. I feel like I play with a very high motor. I never take any plays off. And I feel like that consistency just really sets me apart. Also, I feel like I'm a very, very good run stopper. I feel like I can hold a gap, hold a double team very well. And when needed, I feel like I can rush the passer very well. It's just, I feel like that's one thing I am lacking is a consistent pass rush.
And yeah, so like you hear everyone talk about, okay, I have a great motor. I play with a high motor. I'm relentless. I never give up. And like I said, sometimes you see that on tape. Sometimes you don't. With Kyler, you do see that. He's constantly, when you go watch, his tape from his senior year at Minnesota, he's constantly making plays. He's constantly getting off blocks. He's constantly chasing down running backs, chasing down scrambling quarterbacks. It's the type of stuff you saw out of Malcolm Roach. That's part of the reason Malcolm Roach was able to establish himself at the NFL level out of Texas, because that's a lot of what he did. Go back and watch Malcolm Roach tape and you'll see him constantly making tackles 5, 6, 10 yards downfield to the point that it annoys his teammates at times. Sometimes he comes in, he's always going to be the one that comes flying in from off the screen and just blowing up a runner. And, occasionally he'll catch his own teammates when he does that. Tyrann Mathieu talked about that. But that's the type of player he is. And I think that's going to endear himself to the coaching staff. Now, the Saints have a pretty stacked defensive tackle rotation with Brian Brazil, who's last year's first-round pick, Colin Saunders and Nathan Shepard, who are two veterans. But then you got an opening there. They drafted Christian Boyd in the 6th round out of Northern Iowa. And while I think he's going to have the inside track, they drafted him for a reason, right? Like 6th round, they had some options. They went with Christian, and I think they got good value out of Christian. I think Kyler's going to be right there in terms of being that competition. 6th round picks are not guaranteed a spot on the roster. I think he's going to have to win that job. I don't think it's going to be something where you just say, okay, here you go. So Kyler's going to be, in my opinion, the stiffest competition, because I don't think you're carrying 5 defensive tackles. I do think you would rather have 4 than 3. And right now I only know of 3. Still, Kyler, even if he doesn't get that final spot, you're competing with a guy like Jack Heflin. You're trying to be that first defensive tackle on the practice squad so that if there is an injury, Malcolm Roach last year, you're right there. So it's a guy I'm intrigued by. He played in 13 games, had 41 tackles last year, 5.5 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks. He also broke up 4 passes, so he's got a knack for getting his hand up in the passing lanes. Brian Brzee did that very well in his rookie season as well, and it's just a way for a defensive tackle to make an impact, even if he's not able to get to the quarterback. So he spent 3 years at Houston Baptist. He said he had a lot of transfer portal options. He considered going to Houston, but he went about as far away from Houston as you can go and shipped up to Minnesota, where, interestingly enough, his mentor, so you get to a new school, they kind of assign you a mentor to show you the ropes, kind of get you in to where you need to be, how things go in that program, because every program's a little different. His mentor at Minnesota was Jordan Howden, safety the Saints drafted in the 5th round out of Minnesota last year. So, hey, he can do it again. He's got a guy in that locker room he knows can get comfortable. So, I'm interested. I'm really interested in what he'll be able to do. He's also a good athlete, 4.97 in the 40. He said he wanted to go to a 4-3 team. He's not really a nose. I think that's the difference between Christian and Kyler. Is more of a 3 technique, whereas Christian's more of a nose. And so, they might not be competing directly in terms of what they are best at, but it'll be a question of what you want on the roster and what you want in your depth rotation. And, I think people are going to watch him out there, and he's going to make plays. He's going to make an impact, particularly in the preseason. I think for defensive tackles, it can be difficult to really stand out in camp because you're not allowed to hit the quarterback. You're not allowed to really get violent in camp. And so I think at that position, it comes down a lot of the time to, hey, who stands out most in the preseason? Can you stay healthy? It's a position that people get hurt a lot. So you do need depth. You do need a rotation there. So I think he's a guy, if I was ranking defensive players in terms of, I think when you look at UDFAs, you have to kind of establish 2 different lists. One is who has the best chance to make the roster, and one is who are the best players, because it's not always the same, right? We talked in the first of this series where Jacob Cabote, I wouldn't say he's the top prospect that they brought in terms of talent at their respective positions, but he is at a position where you could see him jumping over the line and making the roster. Matt Hayball's a great example too. Like, he doesn't have to be better than the other 15 UDFAs. He just has to be the best option at the position he plays. And I think, Kyler is up high on both lists because I think he's at a position of need, and he is a talented player who does a lot of things the Saints are going to need. But that's it. We'll wrap up this segment on our second of 2 Meet the UDFAs episodes. We got 3 more players to go, all in the defensive backfield, and one who's going to be my dark horse pick, barring him going out there and looking really, really sketchy in terms of a guy I think might end up making this roster that no one's talking about right now. So stick around for that. Again, I'm Jeff Nowak. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can follow the show Inside Black and Gold on Twitter at Saints_pod. And yes, I'm always going to call it Twitter. You can tell me it's X. I don't care. I'm never going to say X. The app could be called X for the next 20 years. I'm still calling it Twitter. I'm still using the bird. It's still bird app to me. It'll always be a bird app to me. All right. We're going to come back. One more segment to go. One more segment in our Meet the UDFAs series. All 16 of these guys. We have gone through 15 of them. They'll all be out there at the training facility in Metairie over the weekend, and you're getting to know them. Stick around on Inside Black and Gold. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. One more segment to go in our Meet the UDFAs series. There are 3 players left. They are all defensive backs. I'm Jeff Nowak coming at you solo for this episode. We're going to be out there at Saints rookie minicamp. We should be out there Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, one of those 3 days, and we'll get a chance to get in the locker room and talk to some of these guys. I'm going to be intrigued to talk to some of these rookie draft picks in particular, but there's a few of these UDFAs that are definitely worth keeping a very close eye on. And the Saints are a team that has no qualms about keeping a UDFA around, but they have to make an impact, and they're going to have to make an impact immediately. And I think all three of these guys, by virtue of the position they play, have a chance to be one of those, okay, we found a special teams ace, and that's why they're here. And, why do a lot of teams err toward keeping that extra safety or defensive back? Well, when you're talking about special teams, what do you need, right? At least on coverage. You need guys who can go out there, who can sprint downfield, get to the guy, and also make a tackle. Well, what do the defensive backs do for a living? They chase guys around, and they try to tackle them. It's their skill set. So if you're looking at players and saying who's going to stand out on special teams, if that is 95% of their role or 100% of their role for some of these guys, who's going to make the biggest impact? And I'm going to tell you right now, a lot of times it's going to be cornerbacks and safeties. So when you're looking at UDFAs, these are always guys to watch. The Saints didn't go heavy in the draft on defensive backs. They drafted one, and he's a cornerback who you expect to be in the cornerback rotation. And I would say he's a special teams option. I think he will make an impact on special teams. But his biggest role on special teams, I think, is going to be kick as a returner, not necessarily as coverage. You're going to have him out there in coverage, don't get me wrong. But I think Kool-Aid McKinstry, who's what we're talking about, is going to be a coverage guy. So which of these UDFAs is going to stand out not only at their position in the defense, but also on special teams? Let's figure it out. The first guy we're going to talk about, Rico Payton, Pittsburgh State. So this is the third guy, whether it's a draft pick or a UDFA, along with Bub Means out of Pittsburgh proper, and Kyle Sheets out of Slippery Rock, which is just north of Pittsburgh. That is from the Pittsburgh area. The Saints mined the Pittsburgh area extensively. 6 foot, 182 pounds. He's from St. Louis originally. This is Mike Detillier's pick as the guy to watch. So if you trust Mike Detillier's rankings, and I do, he's a big fan of what Rico was able to do. Now, he's going to have a lot to prove as a cornerback in terms of, okay, you were able to stand up against some of these lower level wide receivers. It's kind of similar to Kyle Sheets in that way, is you dominated at the level you were at. But what happens when the competition level steps up? Can you hold up? And we've seen some guys be able to do that. We've seen some guys really fall on their faces. And it's tough to project. One thing I do want to say before we move on, best mascot that I didn't know existed, the Pittsburgh State Gorillas. Great. I'm a fan. It's not a mascot name you hear very often. But yeah, Rico, he's a guy the Saints got a good look at throughout this process. He was one of their top 30 visits. And it's interesting because he saw action as a freshman at Pittsburgh State, and then he didn't really play 2020, 2021, but he came back the last two seasons. This past season, his final year at Pittsburgh State, 64 tackles, 4 interceptions, all of them last year. He's got good size, good length. He really dominated at the level he was at. Again, that's the question. Can he take that step up and succeed? We'll have to find out. But he played a lot of press man. So there's 3 defensive backs here, right? There's a cornerback, in my opinion, a safety, in my opinion, and then kind of a do-it-all option that is really intriguing. And so Rico is the kind of straight cornerback. He says he can play in the slot, but in college he played primarily outside. And I think that's going to be the vision for him in terms of, okay, what are you going to work at mostly in your rookie training camp? And I would say, yeah, it's probably outside corner. So he's going to be kind of in that depth chart somewhere. And because of that, I would say in terms of that list we talked about chances to actually make the roster, I think he's probably down pretty far just because of the depth at outside corner. That said, you do want young guys, and you never know, injuries could happen. You could trade somebody, and that would end up changing the depth chart. So it's not like you say, okay, he can't make the roster, but I do think he's got a really difficult path to making it, regardless of how well he plays. That said, he's a wrestler coming up. He's obviously, that would indicate, hey, you're good with your hands, right? You're good at wrestling at the line of scrimmage. You're good at press man. That's what you do best. So you're going to do that. I tried to get eyes on every single one of these guys as much as I could. Pittsburgh State is not a program that I was able to find a lot of cut-ups of. So, I'm going to have to do a lot of the scouting in terms of how I feel about Rico's skill set on the field once we get out there. That said, you can see in the limited tape that I was able to dig up, you can see that he's very smooth, right? He's very clean in and out of, breaks. He can cover. And, obviously he's good with his hands. He can get all that done. He's got the size, got the speed. So, I do think that he's a guy who could impress as we get out there, but we're going to have to kind of watch and learn with him. But again, the Pittsburgh State Gorillas, my new favorite mascot. All right, moving on. We talked about the cornerback prospect. Now we're going to switch lanes and go to the safety prospect, and that's Millard Bradford, another guy with good size, 5'11", 190 pounds, played at TCU. So unlike Rico, you do get a much better look at his tape because it's all over the place, because TCU is obviously a major program. They were in the championship game 2 years ago. So, he's got experience playing at the top level. He's a Louisiana native. He was a top prep player coming out. He really did stand out at TCU. He just never kind of elevated himself to the top of the safety rankings, but he's got a ton of experience, 58 college games. I think he's going to be one of these guys that comes in and you're going to watch him and be like, okay, that guy's ready to play. I don't know if he has the ceiling of some of these other guys, but I think he's going to show up as one of the more polished players in his college career. 175 solo tackles, 231 total tackles, 16 and a half tackles for loss, 4 interceptions, 19 passes defense, 2 forced fumbles. So he's everywhere, right? He's been making plays for the Horned Frogs for a while now. Good athlete, 4.42 in the 40, 38.5-inch vertical leap, 15 reps at 225. That's impressive strength for a 190-pound guy. 15 reps at 225. Doesn't have the length that you'd want necessarily at the defensive back position. He's kind of a stockier guy, which kind of flies in the face of, okay, he's kind of got the build for a box safety, but the skill set for a range safety, which kind of makes it a tough sell for me in terms of how could he impact this team early on. He grew up a Saints fan, has a lot of Saints fan relatives. So you like him. His nickname's Nook. Do with that what you will. He's good speed. He came up playing track. He's just one of these guys that's always around the ball, and you can see that on tape. He seems to have good instincts based on what I've been able to watch. He does seem like a guy who gambles a lot, right? And you have the interceptions to prove it. But when you're that guy, especially at safety, you can get burned, and that's even more true at the NFL level than it is at college. So that's going to be something to watch. I think there are moments you watch him play, and he makes a play on a ball, and you're like, was that the best read? Was he in the right spot? And, I think that those kind of instincts are going to be interesting to watch play out at the NFL level compared to college, where, your margin for error is a lot slimmer, and the margin for forgiveness is a lot slimmer as well, because if you gamble as a safety and you lose, that's a touchdown. That's a 60-yard touchdown. It's a 70-yard touchdown. You are the last line of defense. So those instincts become paramount at the NFL level. And I think that's part of the reason you see the Saints typically err toward older veteran safeties, because they can trust that part of their game, even if maybe the high end of, okay, we could develop this guy and he could be a starting safety over the next couple of years is a little more promising. The team that's trying to win now, the safety position, you really need guys you can trust. And so it's going to be interesting to see how he kind of factors in there. One more player. We've gone through 15 UDFAs. One more on the list. And he's my dark horse that I think nobody's talking about to make this roster. And it is Lawrence Johnson. It is Southeast Missouri. He's a safety. And I don't know. We talked about the tweener at the top in Isaiah Stalbird. I think Lawrence is kind of a tweener as well, but he's a tweener at safety in terms of, I think he's more of a box safety. He's more of a physical safety. And, you can really know that based on how he was used at SEMO, which I enjoy saying SEMO. SEMO is a lot of fun. But let's hear Lawrence kind of explain what his role was, what his philosophy is. And I think you'll understand, why, just from what I've been able to see and from what I've been able to interpret and from what he's able to tell us, he seems like he would be a good fit for what the Saints need to do.
It looks like Simo used you all over the field, like whether you're playing nickel or safety, a corner. Like, where do you feel like you might best fit in, or is it just one of those I'll do whatever it's asked of me and then some?
I was definitely a Swiss Army knife, is what my defensive backs coach called it. You know, wherever we needed a player plugged in, I was plugged in. I played the strong safety a lot. I played the free safety on the post a lot. I played nickel. I covered a lot of slot guys, a lot of slot speedy receivers. But I also got down in the box. I was lined up as a 5 technique in certain packages. I had blitz packages. I also was Tampa 2 guy. I was the Tampa 2 guy in some of our coverages. So yeah, like you said, I was definitely all over the field. Very versatile guy, very versatile football player with a lot of skill sets. And I am very grateful for the opportunity because it has helped me, be able to just show teams that I'm just a ball player, all around ball player. I started off as a quarterback all my life up until college. And, like I said, that just goes to show that no matter where you put me on the field, I'm going to make plays just because I'm just a ball player.
Yeah. What type of player are the Saints getting? What kind of, work ethic do you bring? How much do you prepare? Kind of just the intangibles that you bring to the team.
Just a dog, all around dog. And that's in every aspect, on and off the field. I take care of the little things like being on time, first in, last out kind of guy, film study, extra film study kind of guy that's no stranger to getting guys to come watch film with me. That was like something that I did a lot at SEMO, was like bringing the younger guys along with me, knowing that someone taught me all the things that I know. So, being able to give back to the game and, teaching the younger guys football. A hard worker, extra reps, extra sets kind of guy. Just like a Mamba mentality, really, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Just all about being gritty and doing whatever it takes to get it done.
Is there anybody here that you're interested in talking to and getting to pick their brain?
Definitely Tyrann Mathieu. That's definitely a guy that I watched, coming up, watching him through college and just how amazing and instinctive he is. That's definitely someone that I have modeled my game after. Tyrann. Guys like, I'm definitely excited to meet guys like Derek Carr and Alvin Kamara, and Marshawn Lattimore. Just even like on the offensive side of the ball, just all those guys that I named, they are very instinctive football players, and I feel like your instincts as a football player, they have to be key. They have to be on point. They got to be on point. I feel like that knowledge of the game, instincts, and, of course, athletic ability. But I think those first two, because everyone in the NFL is big, fast, strong. But I feel like those first two, your instincts and your knowledge of the game, are what separates good players from great players and great players from Hall of Fame players. And, I want to be a Hall of Fame player. I'm going to put the work in and day out to become a good player that turns into a great player that has a Hall of Fame career.
So Swiss Army knife, right? Whenever you hear a player described as a Swiss Army knife, or when he describes himself as a Swiss Army knife, yeah, that's something the Saints appreciate, right? You in the defensive back room, you would call it positional versatility. How much can you play strong? How much can you play free? How much can you play in the box? Can you cover the slot? Can you rush the passer? Can you make a tackle? Can you make a sack? And that's what you saw out of Lawrence at Southeast Missouri his whole career, right? 6 foot, 201 pounds. He had 73 tackles this past season. Just always around the ball. And if I was to comp him to somebody, it would be Lonnie Johnson, the guy who left in free agency this year. Lonnie was a guy who kind of came up as a corner. He played both corner and safety. He was always a little bigger than maybe your ideal build for a corner, but he could always come up and make a tackle. And it's not a coincidence that he became the guy for the Saints, a guy who showed up in camp and no one was really talking about him. But, when I asked Dennis Allen about how his versatility impacted this team, his eyes lit up. He was a guy from day one they liked in that role. I think they wanted to keep him around this offseason, but he preferred to go back and give Houston another shot. And that's what happened. He dealt with a knee injury late in the year, so he didn't make an impact, but he was out there a good bit early in the year, particularly when you were without Marcus May. So if you're looking for a guy who can impact on special teams, which a 6 foot, 200 pound safety is an ideal guy to go out there and make a tackle, who can kind of fill a role in your secondary as kind of that thumping strong safety that, you really haven't replaced since Malcolm Jenkins left. He was kind of that guy, and you Marcus Williams was a center fielder. Now you're kind of more amorphous in terms of how you operate. You want to let Aaron be able to kind of roam, and you need a guy who can come up and just make a tackle in the box. And so I think Lawrence makes a lot of sense there. A couple other things. One, you can tell when you listen to him talk, and I recommend going to listen to his interview, the full interview. And one of the things he did during his interview that I found really engaging was, I've been on a ton of these Zoom calls, right? And you just kind of talk, sometimes people introduce themselves, sometimes they don't. And he was asked a question, and before he answered it, he said, okay, who am I talking to? Like, he wanted the reporter to tell him who he was, where he was from, so that he knew who he was answering. And I don't know, it's just a personality thing that is a lot more important than you might realize when you kind of just break down skill sets and height, weight, and measurables and whatnot. How are you as a person? How are you as a student? How are you as a relationship builder in a locker room? And some guys are good at it, some guys aren't. And I think you can tell just from how he engages with people that Lawrence is good at that. He says he's always looked up to Tyrann Mathieu. And, it's another, we talked about the defensive ends and Cam Jordan, kind of getting in the hip pocket of Tyrann Mathieu early in your career probably isn't a bad way to go about getting to the NFL. And I think, we talk about special teams and we talk about tweeners. And we started with Isaiah Stalbird, who I said, I think, you want to become best friends with Darren Rizzi, because if Darren Rizzi's in your corner in terms of, hey, this is a guy who should make the roster, especially this year where there's a lot of gray area in terms of how much of an impact this new special teams kickoff roles are going to make. That's a guy who can get you on this roster. And I think one of Isaiah Stalbird and Lawrence Johnson is going to be a special teams ace for this team. It's just going to be a question of who. It's going to be a question of what end of that tweener do you want to land on? Do you want the smaller, more coverage-based guy, or do you want the bigger, more tackle-based guy? Both of them are kind of safeties at the end of the day. But there's one other thing in Lawrence's bag that I think is notable, and it's that at SEMO, they ran something called the final drill. It was I think it was every day in practice, as far as I can tell. And it was basically just a punt coverage practice drill. But what it ended up being is effectively a mirror image of what the new kickoff's going to be, right? You just had guys line up in almost like an Oklahoma setup and see who won and who could get to that guy the fastest, right? And Lawrence said that, as a veteran, he ended up being the guy on both sides, the top dog on both sides that, once you won, you stayed. And when you got beat, you left. And he would be there and he would be in that drill every day. So he has experience doing something that a lot of NFL players this year will not have, right? And I don't know. Maybe that helps. Maybe it doesn't. But it certainly doesn't hurt. So, yeah, again, my dark horse to make the roster that no one's talking about, it's going to be Lawrence Johnson, safety, Southeast Missouri, SEMO. You heard it. And I think he's going to be a guy that over the course of the next couple months, people start talking about a lot more than they might be right now. But all right, that's going to wrap it up for this episode and Meet the UDFA series on Inside Black and Gold. I hope that this is helpful. I hope that people learned a bit about these guys. There'll be people we talk about throughout training camp But a lot of times they just kind of fall off the face of the earth. We never talk about them again. So I just think it's valuable to kind of give them their moment, because this is their moment. Rookie minicamp, OTAs. This is where these UDFAs really get a chance to prove they're the next guy. And we'll see what happens. But all right, thanks everyone for watching. I'm Jeff Nowak. This is Inside Black and Gold. If you got all the way to the end and you're not subscribed, why the hell not? All right, hit the button, ring the bell on YouTube, leave a rating, leave a review, wherever you get your podcast. We do all that good stuff. Make sure to check out the latest news, notes, and analysis on WWL.com. We'll be having dispatches from rookie minicamp. I'm hopeful to get you a few exclusive interviews from guys in the locker room. If there's anyone that you want me to look for and talk to specifically, ask any specific questions, hit me up. DMs are open on Twitter, and I'll see what I can do for you. But all right, that's going to be it. Thanks everyone again for watching. Who dat? Go Saints. Be easy, y'all. Peace.